Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1814. The Congress danced, but did not progress. So went the witticism about the grand gathering of European powers assembled to redraw the continent's map after Napoleon's defeat. In the gilded halls of the Hofburg Palace, where chandeliers cast their glow upon the finest silks and most polished boots of the aristocracy, Archduchess Adelheid Dietrich stood forgotten at the edge of the ballroom. At 26, she was considered firmly on the shelf. The Habsburg court had long ago stopped seeking suitable matches for her, despite her imperial connections as a distant cousin to Emperor Franz. Not beautiful enough to attract attention on her own merits, not wealthy enough to compensate for her plain features, she had been relegated to the position of lady-in-waiting to the Empress. "The orchestra is particularly fine tonight," murmured her companion, another overlooked lady-in-waiting. Adelheid nodded, though she had barely noticed the music. Her attention was fixed instead on the dancers, specifically on one man who seemed to float across the floor with uncommon grace. Colonel Sebastian Graymont of the British delegation cut a striking figure in his scarlet regimentals, the gold of his epaulets catching the light as he guided the Russian ambassador's daughter through a quadrille. "He served under Wellington," her companion whispered, following Adelheid's gaze. "They say he distinguished himself at Salamanca." Adelheid had heard the stories. Sebastian Graymont, decorated officer of His Majesty's Army, poet laureate of Oxford, and diplomatic attaché to Lord Castlereagh, a man of both sword and pen, and utterly beyond her reach. She watched as he completed the dance and escorted his partner back to her mother. For a brief moment, his eyes swept the periphery of the room and seemed to pause on her. Adelheid quickly averted her gaze, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "You're blushing," her companion teased. "It's merely warm in here," Adelheid replied, fanning herself with more vigor than necessary. The dance ended, and the crowd's attention turned to a commotion at the entrance. Tsar Alexander I had arrived, fashionably late as was his custom. In the shuffle of bodies as everyone moved to pay their respects, Adelheid found herself separated from her companion and pushed toward a small antechamber off the main ballroom. She slipped inside, grateful for the momentary respite from the crush. The room was small but elegantly appointed, with windows overlooking the palace gardens. Moonlight filtered through the glass, casting silver patterns on the marble floor. "Seeking refuge as well?" The voice startled her. Turning, she found Colonel Graymont standing by the window, a glass of champagne in hand. "Forgive me," she said, cursing in her head that she should encounter him of all people while alone. "I didn't realize the room was occupied." No forgiveness necessary. His German was impeccable, with only the slightest English accent. "I too find the occasional respite necessary." He gestured to the window. "The gardens are particularly beautiful tonight." Adelheid moved closer to the window, maintaining a proper distance. "Yes, the Imperial gardeners are quite skilled." "You are with the Austrian delegation, are you not?" he asked. "I serve the Empress," she replied, surprised he had noticed her at all. And I serve Lord Castlereagh, though my true master remains the written word." He smiled, and Adelheid noticed how the expression transformed his rather severe features into something approachable, almost boyish. "You are a poet," she said. It wasn't a question. Among other things, war and words, strange bedfellows, yet they've defined my life. He studied her with unexpected intensity. "And you? What defines the life of an Austrian lady-in-waiting?" The question caught her off guard. No one at court had ever inquired about her inner life. "Duty," she said finally, "and perhaps a certain quiet observation." "Ah, a fellow observer." His smile deepened. "The best poets begin as observers, you know." Before she could respond, the door opened, and a British attaché appeared. "Colonel, Lord Castlereagh requests your presence." Graymont nodded. "Duty calls." He bowed to Adelheid. "It was a pleasure, Fräulein." "Dietrich." "Archduchess Adelheid Dietrich." "Archduchess." His eyebrows rose slightly, and he bowed more deeply. "The pleasure was entirely mine." As he left, Adelheid remained by the window, wondering at the strange encounter. It was nothing, she told herself. Mere courtesy from a diplomatic officer. Yet she could not help but notice how he had looked at her, not with the dismissive glance she had grown accustomed to, but with genuine curiosity. The next morning, as Adelheid assisted the Empress with her correspondence, a palace footman delivered a small envelope addressed to her. Inside was a folded sheet of paper containing a short poem. In gilded halls where dancers whirl, one stands apart, observing all, her eyes more honest than the pearls that grace the necks of those who fall. For fleeting beauty, quickly gone, true worth resides in depths unseen, in quiet strength that carries on, in minds both sharp and gardens green. It was unsigned, but she knew. The reference to gardens and observation could only come from one source. She quickly tucked the paper into her pocket before anyone could notice, her heart beating a strange rhythm. For 3 days, she saw nothing of Colonel Graymont. The Congress continued its negotiations, balls, and banquets, but their paths did not cross. Then, on the 4th morning, another note arrived. *, might the Archduchess honor me with her company for a walk in the Volksgarten tomorrow at 11? The roses are particularly fine this season, and I find myself in need of a knowledgeable guide to Vienna's horticultural treasures. * Your servant. S. Graymont. Colonel Adelheid stared at the note, torn between propriety and desire. A private meeting would be improper, yet a walk in a public garden during daylight hours could hardly be considered scandalous. After an hour of indecision, she penned a brief reply accepting the invitation. The following day dawned clear and mild. Adelheid dressed with unusual care, selecting a walking dress of pale blue that her lady's maid insisted brought out her eyes. She arranged to be free of her duties by claiming a headache, the first such deception in her life of perfect obedience. At precisely 11, she entered the Volksgarten to find Colonel Graymont waiting by the central fountain. He wore civilian clothes, a dark blue coat and buff trousers that emphasized his military bearing even without a uniform. "Archduchess," he said, bowing. "I feared you might reconsider." "I nearly did," she admitted. "This is rather unconventional." "The best poetry often is." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" As they walked among the roses, Adelheid gradually relaxed. Sebastian, as he asked her to call him when no one could overhear, was easy to talk to. He spoke of his childhood in Dorset, his education at Oxford, his experiences in the Peninsular War. He recited Byron from memory and asked her opinions on Goethe. "And you?" he asked eventually. "Tell me of Archduchess Adelheid." She hesitated. "There is little to tell. My life has been predictable." "I doubt that very much." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I've observed you, you see. At the balls, the diplomatic receptions. You watch and listen while others merely perform. Your eyes miss nothing. A necessary skill when one is overlooked," she said without self-pity. "Is that how you see yourself?" "Overlooked? It is how the world sees me, Colonel. I am neither beautiful nor wealthy enough to merit much attention." Sebastian frowned. "Forgive my impertinence, but whoever gave you that impression is a fool." Adelheid laughed softly. "You are kind, but unnecessary flattery." "It is not flattery," he interrupted. "It is observation. Beauty is not merely symmetry of features or fashionable appearance. It is animation, intelligence, the light that comes from within." He gestured to the roses around them. Some blooms announce themselves with bold colors and perfect petals. Others reveal their beauty only to those who look closely, who appreciate the subtle shadings, the delicate scent. She felt herself blush. "You have a poet's gift for making the ordinary sound exceptional, or perhaps for seeing what is exceptional in what others mistakenly call ordinary." He smiled, then glanced at his pocket watch. "I fear I must return to Lord Castlereagh's soon. Might we walk again tomorrow?" And so began a pattern. Each day, they would meet in the garden for an hour. Sebastian would bring her poems, sometimes his own, sometimes those of others that had made him think of her. Adelheid found herself sharing thoughts she had never voiced aloud. Her love of astronomy, her private studies of history and philosophy, her sketches of palace life that she showed to no one. 2 weeks into their strange friendship, Sebastian presented her with a small leather-bound book. "My latest collection," he explained. "Published just before I left London." Adelheid opened it carefully. On the title page, he had inscribed, "To A.D., who reminds me why I write." That night, she read the entire volume by candlelight. The poems spoke of war and peace, of English countryside and Spanish battlefields. But the final section, titled simply Vienna, contained verses that made her breath catch. I came to count the cost of empire, to measure boundaries on maps. Instead found treasure beyond measure. In quiet glances, thoughtful words. What use our nation's borders drawn? When hearts refuse such limitations, the Congress stretched on as autumn approached. Negotiations stalled and resumed. Alliances formed and fractured. Through it all, Adelheid and Sebastian continued their walks, their conversations growing deeper, more intimate. He told her of the nightmares that still haunted him from the war, of friends lost on Spanish soil. She confessed her loneliness at court, her fear of a future as an aging, forgotten archduchess. I have received orders, Sebastian said one crisp October morning as they walked beneath trees beginning to turn golden. Lord Castlereagh recalls me to London. Adelheid felt something cold settle in her chest. When do you leave? 3 days hence. They walked in silence for several minutes, the gravel crunching beneath their boots. I wish to say something, Sebastian finally spoke, but I fear it presumptuous. You may speak freely with me, she said, though she dreaded his words. He stopped walking and took her gloved hands in his. These months have been the most meaningful of my life. I came to Vienna as a soldier diplomat, weary from war and disenchanted with peace. I found unexpected renewal. As did I, she whispered. Adelheid. It was the first time he had used her name without her title. I returned to England with duties to fulfill, arrangements to make. But I would return to Vienna if. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. If there was hope that an English colonel, with modest estates and a poet's impractical nature, might court an Austrian archduchess properly. She stared at him, scarcely believing his words. The emperor would never permit it. I understand protocol. I would speak with him, with your family. I would do everything correctly. His grip on her hands tightened. But first, I must know if you would wish it. I would wish it more than anything, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. But Sebastian, I am not. I have been told often enough that I am not. If you say not beautiful, I shall be forced to compose an exceedingly long poem explaining all the ways in which that statement is false. His eyes crinkled at the corners. And I warn you, I can be quite verbose. Despite herself, Adelheid laughed. You see beauty where others do not. I see you, he said simply. 3 days later, he departed for London. The winter of 1814 to 1815 was the longest of Adelheid's life. They exchanged letters, proper, carefully worded missives that passed through diplomatic channels and could be read by others without raising eyebrows. But at the bottom of each, in a cipher they had devised together, were words meant only for each other. March brought alarming news. Napoleon had escaped Elba. Europe trembled as the former emperor marched toward Paris, gathering troops. Sebastian's letters stopped. Adelheid knew he would be called back to service, but the silence terrified her. In June came the news of Waterloo. Lists of the dead and wounded filtered slowly back to Vienna. Adelheid searched every report, dreading to find Sebastian's name. When weeks passed with no word, she began to lose hope. Then, in late July, as Vienna sweltered under summer heat, a messenger arrived at the palace. The letter he carried bore the seal of the British diplomatic mission, but the handwriting was Sebastian's. My dearest Adelheid, forgive my silence. I took a French bullet at Waterloo. Nothing fatal, though the surgeons made much drama of removing it from my shoulder. I write to you from Brussels, where I am recovering and where the most extraordinary news has reached me. It seems that during my convalescence, the poems I wrote about Vienna, about you, though I did not use your name, have become something of a sensation in London. The Prince Regent himself has requested a private audience upon my return. More importantly, I have received word from my solicitor that my uncle has died, leaving me his title and estates. I find myself, somewhat inconveniently, the Earl of Westmoreland. I tell you this not to boast, but because it changes our circumstances. An earl may perhaps be considered a more suitable match for an archduchess than a mere colonel. I have requested and received permission from Lord Castlereagh to return to Vienna on a diplomatic mission once my health permits. I expect to arrive by September's end. Until then, I remain yours in every way that matters. When Sebastian returned to Vienna, He came not as a military attaché, but as a diplomatic envoy with the personal blessing of the Prince Regent. His new title and unexpected literary fame smoothed his path into the highest circles of the Habsburg court. Emperor Franz, pragmatic as always, recognized the political value of strengthening ties with Britain in the post-Napoleonic era. When Earl Graymont formally requested permission to court Archduchess Adelheid, the emperor granted it with surprisingly little resistance. Court gossips were astounded. The plain, overlooked Archduchess and the dashing English earl? It made no sense, until the Countess Leven, that most influential of diplomatic hostesses, pronounced Sebastian's poetry the most moving verses since Goethe, and declared that any man who can write with such passion must surely see with clearer eyes than the rest of us. Suddenly, everyone seemed to discover Adelheid's quiet elegance and intelligent beauty. How quickly they changed their tune, Adelheid remarked to Sebastian as they walked openly in the palace gardens, a proper chaperone following at a discreet distance. People see what they are told to see, he replied. I'm grateful I learned to look for myself. They were married in the spring of 1816 in the Imperial chapel, with Emperor Franz himself giving the bride away. As a wedding gift, Sebastian presented his new wife with a slim volume bound in white leather. Inside were all the poems he had written to her, beginning with that first verse from the night they met. On the final page was a new poem, dated their wedding day. They called you plain, those blind to grace, those deaf to wisdom's quiet voice. I found in you my heart's true home, in steady gaze and gentle strength. What fortune that they did not see, the treasure left unclaimed for me. In years to come, should others ask, how love between us came to pass, I'll say it started with a glance. Across a crowded, gilded room, where one stood watching, truly saw, and one, long watching, found himself, at last, completely seen. They departed Vienna for Sebastian's estates in England, though they would return often in the years that followed. Adelheid became known in London literary circles as a hostess of uncommon intelligence and charm. Sebastian continued to write poetry that critics acclaimed, though he always maintained that his greatest work was inspired by his wife. When their first daughter was born, Sebastian wrote a poem comparing her to her mother. She has your eyes, he told Adelheid, the eyes that see everything. And your gift with words, Adelheid replied, watching him cradle their child. May she use it as wisely as her father. In the decades that followed, as Europe transformed through industrial revolution and political reform, the Earl and Countess of Westmoreland built a life that balanced duty with personal happiness. Their correspondence, published many years after their deaths, revealed a partnership of minds and hearts that began in a moonlit garden in Vienna, where a soldier poet discovered beauty that others had been too blind to see.